What if one missing letter could have stopped a war before it even began? Picture this: a single parchment, carefully sealed with wax and entrusted to a messenger, vanishing into the fog of medieval Europe. Its contents held the power to change everything, a plea for peace lost to time. This is the story of the letter that never arrived, a dispatch that might have spared thousands from bloodshed had it only reached its destination. The twist: no one knows for certain whether it was sabotage, a simple mistake, or just cruel fate that kept it from arriving. But one thing's clear: its disappearance set in motion a chain of events that reshaped kingdoms. Think about how fragile history can be. A misplaced document, a delayed rider, a misunderstood order. These tiny fractures in communication can spiral into disasters. In an age before instant messaging or even reliable roads, a letter wasn't just words on a page, it was a lifeline. Kings and diplomats waited for them like we wait for breaking news today, their decisions hanging on every syllable. And when one of those critical messages went missing, the consequences could be catastrophic. That's exactly what happened here. A plea for negotiation, a last-ditch effort to avoid conflict, slipped through the cracks, and the world paid the price. So what was in this fateful letter? Who wrote it, and why did it never arrive? The answers lie buried in layers of medieval politics, personal rivalries, and the sheer unpredictability of life in a world where news traveled at the speed of a horse. Over the course of this video, we'll piece together the clues, from the frantic scribbles of scribes to the hushed conversations in royal courts. You'll meet the key players, uncover their motives, and see how a single stroke of bad luck, or perhaps something more sinister, tipped the scales toward war. By the end, you'll never look at a missed message the same way again, because sometimes the most pivotal moments in history aren't decided on the battlefield, but in the silence of a letter that never came. To grasp just how devastating the loss of this letter could be, you have to step into the world of medieval diplomacy, where trust was paper thin and power shifted like sand. Picture a Europe fractured into countless kingdoms, duchies, and city-states, each ruled by nobles who schemed as much as they governed. Alliances were brokered with marriage pacts and gold, but they could unravel in an instant if word arrived late or not at all. This was an era without standing armies or centralized command. Wars began when someone felt slighted, or worse, ignored. A delayed apology, a misinterpreted demand, or yes, a missing letter could be the spark that lit the powder keg. Messengers weren't just couriers, they were political lifelines, handpicked for their loyalty and endurance. A king's entire strategy might hinge on one man's ability to ride through bandit-infested forests or cross mountain passes in a blizzard. And yet, for all their importance, these messengers had no guarantees. Records from the time are filled with accounts of riders waylaid by storms, robbed by outlaws, or even vanishing without a trace. Some were intercepted by rival lords who'd pay handsomely for the secrets in their satchels. Others simply fell ill or took a wrong turn, their crucial dispatches rotting in some forgotten saddlebag. The irony: many of these letters contained desperate attempts to prevent conflict. Kings and popes often wrote in frantic loops of negotiation, offering concessions or proposing summits if only their words reached the other side in time. But distance was the great enemy. A letter sent from Paris to Rome could take weeks, and by the time it arrived, the situation on the ground might have already boiled over. Armies mobilized on rumors, sieges began over misunderstandings, and once the first sword was drawn, it was nearly impossible to walk back. That's what makes this lost letter so haunting. We'll never know if its words could have cooled tempers or stalled the march to war. All we know is that when the silence stretched too long, someone decided to act, and history veered onto a bloodier path. What's chilling is how ordinary the tragedy was. For every famous lost letter that might have changed history, there were doubtless hundreds that vanished without a trace, their absence quietly shaping the world in ways we'll never fully see. The medieval world ran on parchment and ink, but it was held together by something far more fragile. Trust, and trust, as any diplomat knew, was only as reliable as the messenger who carried it. The monarch at the heart of this drama was King Alaric of Westmark, a ruler known more for his diplomacy than his sword. By all accounts, he preferred negotiating tables to battlefields, a rarity in an age where most kings measured their worth in conquered land. His letters to other rulers often spoke of shared prosperity, trade routes, and even joint festivals to ease tensions. But his greatest weakness was optimism. He kept believing reason would prevail, even as his spies whispered warnings of mustering troops across the border. The letter he sent that fateful autumn was his masterpiece of persuasion, a detailed offer to split disputed territories, complete with maps drawn by his own hand. He'd even included a personal token, a silver brooch from his late queen, a symbol of good faith. For Alaric, this wasn't just politics, it was a last stand for peace. His rival, Duke Henrik of Blackfen, couldn't have been more different. Where Alaric saw compromise, Henrik saw opportunity. A younger son who'd clawed his way to power through cunning marriages and midnight ambushes, he ruled his rocky northern lands with a blend of charm and menace. Historians still debate whether he ever intended to honor any treaty. Some argue his armies were already marching when Alaric's letter was penned. Others insist he might have paused if the offer had reached him in time. What's certain is that Henrik had spies of his own, including many suspect agents planted among the royal messengers. And then there was the courier, a man known only as Brother Anselm in the monastery, records that mention him. Unlike the flamboyant heralds who carried declarations of war, Anselm was a quiet figure, a former scribe turned lay brother who'd taken vows of poverty. That made him the perfect choice for a mission requiring discretion. He could blend into pilgrim caravans, his humble robes hiding the most important document in the kingdom. But somewhere along the winding road through the Blackthorn Pass, Anselm vanished. Some say bandits ambushed him. Others whisper that a rival lord's scouts intercepted him, recognizing the royal seal. The darkest rumors suggest he never left the capital at all, that someone in Alaric's own court made sure the letter burned before dawn. What makes these three figures so fascinating is how their fates collided over a single piece of parchment. Alaric, the idealist who gambled everything on words; Henrik, the opportunist who may or may not have wanted an excuse for war; and Anselm, the ordinary man handed an extraordinary burden, only to become a ghost in his own story. Together, they embody the brutal truth of medieval politics. Even the most carefully laid plans could unravel at the whim of a single stranger on a lonely road. The deeper you dig, the more questions arise. Did Henrik ever learn what was in that letter? Would it have changed anything if he had? And what became of Anselm? Did he die a martyr for peace, or did he simply lose his way in the fog? These aren't just historical footnotes. They're reminders that behind every war there are human faces, the hopeful, the ruthless, and the ones who vanished without a trace. The contents of that lost letter remain one of history's most tantalizing mysteries, like a half-told secret that could rewrite everything we know about this conflict. Court scribes who later pieced together the events mention a most urgent missive sent by King Alaric, but the original text is gone, leaving us to reconstruct its message from scattered clues. What makes it so fascinating isn't just what was written, but how those words might have altered the course of events. Surviving letters from Alaric to other rulers reveal a pattern. He always opened with flattery, acknowledging the recipient's wisdom before delicately broaching tensions. Historians believe this lost dispatch likely followed the same structure: lavish praise for Duke Henric's military prowess, followed by a carefully worded appeal to avoid wasting those strengths on a costly war. But here's where the theories diverge. Some scholars point to a ledger found in Westmark's archives, listing gold and grain shipments that match rumors of Alaric offering tribute. Others cite a knight's diary describing secret talks about a marriage alliance between the two houses, an offer that vanished along with the courier. Then there's the brooch. That silver heirloom wasn't just a gift. In medieval diplomacy, personal tokens were bargaining chips. Its inclusion suggests the letter contained more than pretty words, perhaps a tangible offer of land or titles. But Henric's later actions raised doubts. When his forces stormed across the border weeks later, he claimed Alaric had sent only empty promises. Was that the truth or a convenient excuse? The bitter irony is that we may never know if the letter's absence doomed the peace or if its contents were already too little, too late. The deeper you dig, the more layers emerge. A fragment of a monk's chronicle mentions a sealed addendum meant for Henric's eyes alone, fueling speculation about hidden terms. Meanwhile, a merchant's account describes seeing Alaric's scribe working late the night before the letter was sent, burning drafts in the fireplace as if erasing evidence of revisions. Every clue feels like a puzzle piece from a different box, leaving us to wonder, was this a sincere peace offering or a desperate stalling tactic? What's undeniable is how much weight rested on those unread words. In an age where ink could halt armies, this single letter wasn't just paper. It was the last thread holding back the flood. And when that thread snapped, the consequences echoed across generations. The real tragedy, we're left forever guessing whether its arrival could have changed history, or if some wars were simply inevitable. The road from Westmark to Blackfen was no simple ride through peaceful countryside. It was a gauntlet of natural dangers and human treachery. Brother Anselm would have set out at first light, his saddlebags heavy with more than just provisions. That letter wasn't merely parchment, it was the weight of a kingdom's hopes pressing against his ribs with every mile. His route took him first through the Whispering Forest, a dense tangle of ancient oaks where bandits lurked beneath canopies so thick, even midday felt like twilight. Local legends spoke of travelers who vanished without a sound, their horses found days later, grazing calmly with empty saddles. Then came the Blackthorn Pass, a narrow trail carved between jagged cliffs where rockslides were as common as cutpurses. Winter was coming early that year, and ice already glazed the higher paths. One misstep could send a horse tumbling into the ravine below, a fate that befell more than one courier in the chronicles of the time. But the greatest test lay beyond the mountains, the fords of Marrow, a deceptively shallow river whose currents could drag a man under in seconds. Crossing required perfect timing, and Anselm would have known the stories of messengers who drowned clutching their sealed letters, the ink bleeding into the water like ghosts of unfinished business. Yet nature wasn't the only threat. The borderlands teemed with Henric's scouts who'd been known to lose inconvenient messengers in the wilderness. A bribe might save a common courier, but a royal dispatch, that was worth killing for. Some historians argue Anselm never even reached the river. A charcoal sketch in a merchant's journal depicts a hooded figure surrounded by armed men near the forest's edge, too vague to confirm but haunting enough to fuel speculation. Others point to a bandit captain's confession years later, boasting of a monk he'd robbed carrying nothing but fancy paper, though the timeline doesn't quite match. The cruelest possibility, that Anselm made it farther than anyone realized. Fragments of a waystone near Blackfurn's border bear markings some claim match the royal seal's design, as if someone tried to scratch it away in haste. Was he ambushed within sight of his destination, or did he, against all odds, deliver the letter only for Henrik to burn it unread? Without Anselm's body or the letter itself, every theory remains suspended between history and rumor. What makes this journey so gripping isn't just the physical dangers, it's how perfectly it mirrors the fragility of medieval communication. A message wasn't truly sent until it was received, and every inch between those points was a battlefield without rules. Forests swallowed sounds, rivers erased trails, and trust was as thin as the parchment that carried it. Brother Anselm's path wasn't just a road, it was a thread stretched taut across a canyon, and when it snapped, two kingdoms tumbled into the abyss. At first, King Alaric assumed the delay was just another quirk of medieval travel, maybe a swollen river forcing Brother Anselm to detour, or an early snow in the mountains slowing his pace. But as the days stretched into a week with no word from Blackfurn, unease crept into the royal court. Servants noted how Alaric's fingers drummed restless rhythms on the arm of his throne during audiences, his gaze flicking to the hall's entrance every time the doors creaked open. By the second week, the whispers began. Had Henrik refused to reply out of spite? Was he mustering forces while Alaric waited like a fool? The king's advisors urged caution, but their reassurances rang hollow against the mounting silence. Then came the merchant caravan from the north, their carts laden with Blackfurn wool and ironwork. Their leader, wide-eyed with nerves, delivered the blow. Duke Henrik's banners were flying at full muster. Troops drilled in the fields outside his castles. Supply wagons clogged the roads, and most damning of all, no royal messenger had been seen at Henrik's court in over a fortnight. That's when the truth struck Alaric like a physical blow. The letter hadn't just been ignored, it had never arrived. His plea for peace was rotting in some ditch, or worse, clutched in the hands of an enemy who'd chosen war anyway. The realization unfolded in slow, sickening waves. First came fury at the courier, at the roads, at the sheer unfairness of it all. Then, chillingly, strategy. If Henrik hadn't received the letter, he'd assume Alaric had spurned negotiation. Every day of silence would read as arrogance, a king too proud to even acknowledge his rival. Alaric's own scouts confirmed the nightmare. Blackfurn's forces weren't just preparing, they were advancing. The window for peace had slammed shut while he'd been waiting for a reply that would never come. What makes this moment so tragic is how preventable it all seems in hindsight. With today's technology, a failed message pings back instantly. But in Alaric's world, absence wasn't just silence, it was a weapon. The lack of a letter became its own message, one Henrik interpreted as contempt. By the time Alaric scraped together a second plea for talks, his envoys were turned away at sword point. The bridge had burned before either side even knew the spark was lit. Records from that final week before the war reveal a court paralyzed by doubt. Alaric's scribes wrote and rewrote letters they'd never send, each draft more desperate than the last. His generals argued over whether to mobilize or hold firm, their debates echoing through chambers where Brother Anselm had once bent over his copying desk. And somewhere beyond the mountains, whether buried in mud or ash, a single unread letter held the words that might have changed everything, if only they'd been heard. History often turns on these quiet pivots, the moments when someone realizes too late that their voice never reached the room. For Alaric, that moment came when the first smoke rose on the horizon, staining the dawn sky above villages he'd hoped to protect. The war wasn't started by clashing swords or bold declarations. It began with a silence where a reply should have been, and a king standing alone in his hall, staring at an empty road. The first flames of war spread faster than anyone anticipated. Without Alaric's letter to temper tensions, Duke Henric's forces crossed the border under the banner of avenged honor, claiming Westmark had insulted them by refusing to negotiate. Villages along the frontier woke to the thunder of hooves and the crackle of thatched roofs set ablaze. Farmers who'd traded peacefully with Blackfen for generations now clutched their children and ran for the woods, their fields trampled beneath armored boots. The irony was bitter. This wasn't a war of clashing ideals or irreconcilable differences. It was a war born from silence, from the void where a single conversation should have been. Alaric's response was a study in desperation. His scouts brought word of the invasion just as the smoke reached his capital's outskirts. The king, who'd once prided himself on diplomacy, now faced an enemy convinced he'd spurned peace. His council splintered. Some urged immediate retaliation, while others begged for one last overture. But time had run out. By the time Alaric mustered his knights, Henric's vanguard had already seized 3 key river crossings, choking off supply routes. The very territories Alaric had offered to share in his lost letter now became strategic prizes, their value measured in blood. What followed was a conflict marked by grim escalation. Without the original letter's proposed compromises, both sides dug into hardened positions. Henric's forces, believing they'd been scorned, fought with a fury that surprised even their own commanders. Westmark's defenders, equally convinced of Blackfen's treachery, retaliated with equal ferocity. The war's early battles were less about territory than perception, each clash reinforcing the idea that the other side had never wanted peace. Chroniclers later wrote of a skirmish near the ruins of an old bridge, where soldiers from both armies shouted accusations across the water, each blaming the other for starting what the missing letter might have stopped. The human cost was staggering. Within months, entire villages stood empty, their populations scattered or buried. Crops rotted in fields now crisscrossed with trenches. And yet, the cruelest twist came from an unlikely source. A Blackfen courier captured near the front lines, carrying dispatches that mentioned, almost in passing, that no royal letter from Westmark had ever reached Duke Henric's court. The news reached Alaric in his war tent, where he's said to have stared at the messenger in stunned silence before whispering, all this for a scrap of parchment lost in the woods. By the war's second year, both sides were locked in a stalemate of their own making. The original dispute, a handful of border towns and trade rights, had ballooned into a struggle for survival, with neither king able to back down without losing face. The conflict that might have been resolved with ink and wax now demanded steel and fire, and somewhere beneath the trampled mud of a mountain pass or the ashes of a bandit camp, a single unread letter molded away, its words long since dissolved by rain or flame. The tragedy wasn't just the lives lost, it was the haunting certainty that none of it needed to happen. Wars are often remembered for their grand battles or heroic last stands. But this one lingers in the imagination for what might have been, for the quiet moment when 2 rulers, separated by bad roads and worse luck, became prisoners of a misunderstanding neither truly intended. The saddest part, even after the fighting ended, no one could say for certain whether the letter's arrival would have changed anything. Some wounds, once opened, refused to heal cleanly. And some silences echo far louder than the clash of swords. Imagine a world where Brother Anselm's horse never stumbled in Blackthorn Pass, where the wax seal on that letter stayed intact all the way to Duke Henric's hands. Would history have unfolded differently, or were these 2 kingdoms always destined for war? This question has haunted historians for centuries, and the answers reveal just how thin the line between peace and conflict really was. Some scholars argue the letter's arrival would have been transformative. Alaric's offer, whether gold, land, or a marriage alliance, might have appealed to Henric's practical side. The Duke was an opportunist, not a mindless warmonger. A generous enough bribe could have bought time for tempers to cool, or at least delayed the fighting long enough for other mediators to step in. There's precedent. Records show Henrik once halted an invasion of a neighboring duchy after receiving a last-minute chest of silver and a promise of trade rights. He wasn't above negotiation when the price was right, but others paint a darker picture. Even if the letter had reached Henrik, its contents might have been dismissed as a stalling tactic. The Duke's inner circle included hardliners who'd been pushing for war for years, men who stood to gain from redistributed lands and looted wealth. A letter pleading for peace could have been spun as proof of Westmark's weakness, fueling the argument to strike while Alaric was unprepared. Henric's own scribes later wrote that his army was already mobilized by the time the letter would have arrived, suggesting the gears of war were too far in motion to stop. The most intriguing theory, that the letter's disappearance was the best possible outcome. Had Henrik received it and rejected it publicly, Alaric's supporters would have seen their king as weak for trying to bargain. The resulting civil unrest might have fractured Westmark from within, making the war even bloodier. At least in the timeline we know, Alaric could claim the moral high ground. He'd tried to prevent the conflict, even if no one heard his plea. What this thought experiment reveals isn't just about medieval politics. It's about the illusions of control we cling to in every era. We want to believe that clear communication can prevent disaster, that good intentions matter more than circumstance. But sometimes, even the right words arrive too late or fall into the wrong hands. The tragedy of Alaric's lost letter isn't just that it might have changed things. It's that we'll never know for certain whether it could have made a difference at all. And perhaps that's the real lesson here. History isn't a chessboard where one moved piece alters the entire game. It's more like a storm at sea, shaped by currents too deep and winds too chaotic for any single act to redirect. The letter's fate reminds us that peace is never guaranteed, not by parchment, not by promises, and certainly not by good intentions alone. Sometimes the world tips into war not because anyone truly wants it, but because the threads of understanding snap before they can bear the weight. Sending a message in the medieval world was like rolling the dice with fate itself. Unlike today, where a text can cross oceans in seconds, communication back then was a high-stakes gamble, slow, fragile, and fraught with peril. Picture a lone rider urging his horse through mud-choked roads, the precious letter in his satchel as vulnerable as a candle in the wind. Every mile was a new risk, bandits lurking behind trees, storms turning paths into rivers, or simply a horse throwing a shoe at the worst possible moment. Even the most carefully penned words were only as good as the journey that carried them. Trust was the rarest currency of all. Kings and nobles relied on messengers they hoped were loyal, but betrayal was always a possibility. A courier might be bribed to lose a letter or worse, intercepted by rivals who'd rewrite its contents before resealing it with forged wax. Some lords employed coded phrases or hidden marks to detect tampering, but even these weren't foolproof. The sheer time it took to send and receive replies made everything worse. A letter sent in spring might not get an answer until harvest season, leaving tensions to simmer unchecked. By then, assumptions hardened into facts and rumors festered into grudges. Geography was another silent enemy. Europe's roads were little more than dirt tracks in many places, winding through forests thick with wolves and thieves. Mountain passes became death traps in winter, while summer droughts turned rivers into impassable mudflats. Messengers didn't just need courage, they needed luck. Records from the era are filled with accounts of riders who vanished without a trace, their errands, and the histories they might have changed swallowed by the wilderness. The real tragedy, these failures weren't exceptions, they were the norm. For every letter that arrived safely, countless others were lost, delayed, or altered along the way. Courts maintained entire departments of scribes just to copy and resend dispatches, hoping redundancy might beat the odds. But when a message carried urgent stakes like Alaric's doomed plea for peace, there was rarely time for second chances. What's haunting is how much rested on such fragile systems. Wars were started, treaties broken, and dynasties toppled not because of grand betrayals, but because of muddy roads, tired horses, or a single unscrupulous innkeeper who slipped something into a messenger's drink. In an age without backups or receipts, silence wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. A missing letter didn't just mean a delayed conversation. It meant two kingdoms marching to war, each convinced the other had already refused to listen. This is why the story of Alaric's lost dispatch isn't just a medieval curiosity. It's a stark reminder of how easily communication breaks down when the world lacks the safety nets we take for granted today. We live in an era of receipts and read notifications, where even a dropped call can be instantly redialed. But strip those away and suddenly the past doesn't feel so distant. The same fears that kept medieval kings awake, did they get my message? Did they even care? Still linger in our own moments of misunderstood texts or ignored emails. The scale is different, but the stakes feel just as personal. Perhaps that's the most enduring lesson here. Technology changes, but human nature doesn't. We've always been at the mercy of the channels that carry our words, whether they're inked on parchment or glowing on screens. And when those channels fail, the consequences ripple far beyond what any sender could predict. Alaric's story isn't just about a letter, it's about the terrifying power of the unsaid, and how easily the absence of a reply can become its own devastating answer. The story of Alaric's lost letter isn't unique. It's part of a haunting pattern woven through history, where missing or delayed words tip the scales toward chaos. Take the Roman Empire, where a single undelivered scroll might have changed the fate of entire legions. In the year 69, during the infamous Year of the Four Emperors, Emperor Vitellius sent a desperate plea for reinforcements to his northern armies as his rival marched on Rome. But the messenger was ambushed by Alpine tribes, and the letter never reached its destination. By the time Vitellius realized his call for help had gone unanswered, his capital was already in flames. What's chilling is how ordinary the tragedy was. Not a grand betrayal, just bad luck on a mountain road. Centuries later, during the 100 Years' War, a similar twist of fate unfolded. In 1415, the Duke of Burgundy sent a sealed offer of alliance to the English commander at Agincourt, proposing a joint attack on French forces. But the messenger drowned crossing the Somme River, and the letter washed ashore weeks later, long after the battle had been fought and lost. Historians still debate whether that alliance could have altered the outcome of one of history's most lopsided clashes. The irony, the French found the sodden letter first, giving them advance warning of the plot. Sometimes a message didn't just fail to arrive, it fell into precisely the wrong hands. The Renaissance offers an even darker twist: deliberate interception. In 1527, as tensions between Florence and the Holy Roman Empire reached a breaking point, a Florentine diplomat's carefully worded appeal for papal support was stolen by imperial agents. They replaced it with a forged version full of insults, ensuring Pope Clement VII would side against Florence. The city fell within months, its fate sealed by ink it never meant to send. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a reminder that in the shadowy world of medieval espionage, letters weren't just lost, they were weaponized. What ties these stories together isn't just misfortune, it's the fragile nature of communication itself. Before telegraphs or treaties, words on parchment were the threads holding civilizations together. A snapped thread could unravel kingdoms. The Byzantine Empire even developed an elaborate system of fire beacons to warn of invasions when couriers failed, proving how deeply rulers feared the silence where a reply should be. Yet for every ingenious solution, there were a dozen messages sinking to the bottom of rivers or burning in bandit camps. The most heartbreaking cases involved not war, but missed chances for peace. In 1630, during the 30 Years' War, a Swedish envoy carrying terms for a ceasefire was killed in a skirmish neither side had authorized. By the time his body was found, the fighting had escalated beyond recall. Years later, a Saxon general's diary revealed both armies had been desperate to stop. They just never received the right words at the right time. These echoes of Alaric's tragedy reveal a sobering truth. History isn't just shaped by the messages that were heard, but by the ones that vanished into the void. For every famous speech or treaty, there's a ghost counterpart, a letter that could have changed everything if only it had reached its destination. What makes these lost dispatches so compelling isn't their rarity, but their terrifying normalcy. In a world where communication moved at the speed of a horse, silence was never just silence. It was a verdict. The hunt for Alaric's lost letter began almost as soon as the first battle drums sounded a frantic scramble to undo a mistake that had already set armies in motion. Within days of realizing the dispatch had vanished, the king ordered search parties to retrace Brother Anselm's route, offering rewards so generous they drew peasants from their plows and monks from their prayers. They scoured the whispering forest inch by inch, turning over rotting logs and questioning charcoal burners who might have glimpsed a lone rider. At the Blackthorn Pass, soldiers lowered ropes into ravines, probing for bones or saddlebags among the rocks. But the mountains kept their secrets. The only trace they found was a tattered scrap of parchment caught on a thorn bush, too weather-worn to read, but enough to fuel wild theories. Had Anselm been attacked here, or was this just debris from some merchant's ledger, blown by the wind? Rumors swirled like autumn leaves. A shepherd's boy claimed to have seen a silver brooch, just like Queen Isolde's tossed into a bandit's campfire near the fords of Marrow. A traveling minstrel swore he'd met a broken-nosed mercenary who bragged of intercepting a monk with a king's words before silencing him forever. None of these leads held up under scrutiny, but they revealed something darker: how quickly myth bled into fact when stakes were this high. By winter, the searches grew sporadic, then ceased altogether. The war had become its own reality, untethered from the letter that might have prevented it. Yet the story doesn't end there. Centuries later, a crumbling ledger in a Venetian archive listed a sealed Westmark missive among items looted during the sack of Blackfurn's treasury in 1421. Had Henric's successors hidden the letter all along, only for it to be lost again in another war? Or was this a different document entirely? The entry's vagueness torments historians. Even more tantalizing is a merchant's diary from 1603, describing a frayed letter with a broken silver seal sold at a Paris flea market, the seller insisting it had been plucked from a dead man's cloak in the Alps. The buyer unknown, the letter's contents never recorded. The most persistent legend involves a 19th-century antiquarian who supposedly discovered the dispatch tucked inside a mislabeled prayer book in a Yorkshire monastery. He reportedly collapsed mid-translation, whispering, "God forgive us all," before locking the pages away and taking the truth to his grave. Skeptics dismiss it as Gothic fantasy, but true believers point to the man's hastily scrawled will, which bequeathed an unreadable burden to be burned unopened. Whether fact or fiction, these fragments share a common thread. the letter's ghostly habit of resurfacing just long enough to torment those who glimpse it, then vanishing again like smoke. What makes these searches so compelling isn't just the mystery, it's what they reveal about how history gets made. Most lost documents stay lost, fading into the white noise of time. But a select few, like Alaric's letter, become mirrors for our own obsessions. Every generation projects its hopes and fears onto that blank space where the words should be. For medieval chroniclers, the missing dispatch was proof of divine punishment. Enlightenment scholars saw it as a parable about reason thwarted by chaos. Modern historians hunt for it like detectives, as if solving this one riddle could somehow retroactively mend the fractures it left behind. Perhaps the real tragedy isn't that the letter was lost, but that we keep hoping to find it. As if holding that crumpled parchment could rewrite the past, erasing battles and funerals with a single flourish of ink. The truth is messier. Even if the original words someday surface, they'll never undo the choices made in their absence. Wars aren't stopped by letters, only by the people who choose to heed them. And in 1482, on a road slick with autumn rain, those people were nowhere to be found. The idea that Alaric's letter vanished by design isn't just speculation. It's a theory that's divided historians for generations. Picture this: a faction within Westmark's own court, nobles who stood to gain from war, quietly ensuring the king's plea for peace never reached its destination. Maybe they bribed a guard to look the other way as the courier's saddlebag was slit open. Maybe they paid a bandit chief to ambush a specific rider in a specific pass. In an era where political murders were often disguised as accidents, silencing a messenger would have been child's play. And the motive, war, meant land grabs and plunder, opportunities for ambitious men to rise while others bled. Then there's the Blackfen angle. Duke Henrik's spymaster, a shadowy figure named Varga, was notorious for intercepting rival dispatches. Chronicles from neighboring realms describe his network of informants, innkeepers who drugged travelers, stable boys who swapped horseshoes for looser ones. If Varga's agents had caught wind of Alaric's letter, they wouldn't just have stolen it, they'd have staged its disappearance to look like misfortune. A broken wagon wheel here, a staged bandit attack there, enough plausible deniability to let Henrik claim ignorance while marching his troops forward. But not all scholars buy into these cloak and dagger scenarios. Some point out that medieval logistics were simply unreliable. Roads were treacherous, weather unpredictable, and even loyal messengers could misjudge a river's current or a cliff's edge. The truth might be painfully mundane: a tired horse, a sudden storm, a wrong turn in the dark. After all, records from the same decade list dozens of lost couriers carrying routine tax notices or wedding invitations. If even mundane messages vanished regularly, why assume this one's fate was anything but chance? The debate takes a darker turn when you consider Brother Anselm himself. Why would Alaric send a humble monk instead of a seasoned herald? Was it a bid for secrecy, or was Anselm chosen because he was expendable? Court documents show the monk had recently testified against a powerful baron in a land dispute. Sending him on a perilous journey could have been a convenient way to silence him permanently. If so, the letter's loss was collateral damage in a smaller, uglier game. What makes this conspiracy so enduring isn't just the stakes, it's the gaps. Medieval chronicles are riddled with omissions, their authors careful not to accuse living lords of treason. Even today, digging for answers feels like tracing footsteps in wet sand. Every clue dissolves into maybes, the only certainty. Somewhere between Westmark's candlelit scriptorium and Blackfen's war council, the truth was buried, whether by human hands or indifferent fate. And in that uncertainty, the conspiracy thrives, a ghost that refuses to be laid to rest. Perhaps the most chilling possibility isn't that the letter was stolen, but that it was delivered too well. What if Henrik did receive it, read it, and burned it not out of malice but cold calculation? A king's handwritten plea for peace would have been a potent symbol, something his own peace faction might have wielded against him. Destroying it erased the temptation to hesitate. In that light, the letter's disappearance wasn't an accident or even a theft. It was the first casualty of a war everyone saw coming, but no one dared stop. Brother Anselm's disappearance left behind more questions than answers, a void filled with whispers and grim speculation. Unlike the kings and nobles who dominate the history books, messengers like him were seldom remembered unless they failed. And failure in this case wasn't just a mark against his name, it was a death sentence for thousands. So what became of the quiet monk who vanished with the weight of peace on his shoulders? The records offer fragments, each more haunting than the last. One account claims Alaric's court scribe wrote of a faithful servant lost to the wilds, suggesting the king believed Anselm had died en route. But dig deeper and contradictions emerge. A merchant's ledger from a nearby town mentions a hooded brother buying provisions weeks after the letter was sent, far too late for the original mission. Could Anselm have survived the journey only to abandon his duty? Or worse, was he deliberately silenced after delivering the letter, his knowledge too dangerous to let live? The monastery where he'd taken vows held a memorial service, yet no body was ever returned. His cell remained untouched for years, as if the brothers expected him to walk back in, dust on his robes and an apology on his lips. The darker theories center on Blackfen. Henrik's spymaster, Varga, kept meticulous records of intercepted messengers, but Anselm's name is conspicuously absent. Some argue this proves his disappearance was accidental, a horse stumbling into a ravine, a fever felling him in some lonely inn. Others see a masterstroke of espionage, Varga erasing all traces of a prisoner who knew too much. A ballad from the era spins a tale of a monk imprisoned in a castle dungeon, scratching the letter's contents onto the walls with his fingernails before the stones drank his voice forever. Poetic license, surely, but why does the description of that fictional dungeon match the oubliette beneath Blackfen's eastern tower? Then there's the question of blame. Messengers who failed weren't just dismissed, they were often executed as traitors or cowards. Yet Alaric's court showed strange restraint. No orders were issued for Anselm's arrest, no public denunciations. Was this the king's guilt showing? A silent acknowledgement that the real failure lay not with the messenger, but with the system that sent him alone into the wilderness? Or had someone in the court ensured Anselm would take the fall, scattering just enough doubt to shield themselves? The most heartbreaking possibility is that Anselm succeeded only to be erased. Imagine him reaching Blackfen's gates, handing the letter to a steward, then being led to a cellar for his safety. Henrik's scribes would never record the arrival of a plea they meant to ignore. The monk's disappearance would then be no accident, but a necessary lie to maintain the illusion that Westmark had never reached out. It's a scenario that turns Anselm from a victim of misfortune into a martyr for peace, his name scrubbed from history to serve a narrative of righteous war. What lingers isn't just the mystery of his fate, but the way it mirrors countless other careers swallowed by history. For every famous battle or treaty, there were dozens of ordinary people like Anselm, men and women who carried the words that shaped empires only to vanish into the margins. Their stories remind us that history isn't just made by those who give orders, but by those who brave the storm to deliver them. And sometimes the greatest courage lies not in wielding power, but in being the fragile thread that tries and fails to hold the world together. The Lost Letters' shadow stretches far beyond dusty archives. It's woven into the fabric of art and storytelling, each reinterpretation adding new layers to its mystery. Medieval chroniclers were the first to immortalize the tale, though their accounts dripped with bias. A Westmark monk's illuminated manuscript depicts Brother Anselm as a haloed martyr, his outstretched hand clutching the letter as demons drag him into a chasm. Blackfan's version, etched into a tapestry hung in their great hall, shows a laughing courier tossing the dispatch into a fire while Alaric's envoys cower. These weren't just records, they were propaganda, weaponizing the story to justify bloodshed. Centuries later, Renaissance playwrights seized on the drama. Anselm performed 1583 tragedy. The Silent Courier reimagines Anselm as a love-struck scribe who deliberately loses the letter to protect a secret affair with Henric's sister. The twist, his betrayal sparks the war that kills her, a twist of Shakespearean irony that floored audiences. Less successful was The King's Missive, a 1720s opera where Alaric's letter is intercepted by a mischievous forest spirit, a heavy-handed metaphor for fate that critics panned as more fable than history. Modern adaptations take sharper angles. A best-selling 2006 novel, The Wax Seal, frames the disappearance as a feminist thriller. Anselm's sister, a laundress, pieces together court conspiracy threads while men dismiss her as hysterical. The letter itself becomes a MacGuffin, its contents less important than the power struggles it exposes. Even cinemas tried its hand. A moody 2019 indie film portrays the courier's journey in near silence, the crunch of snow underfoot and the sigh of parchment unfolding louder than any battle cry. What makes these retellings fascinating isn't their accuracy, but their obsessions. Every era projects its fears onto that blank space where the letter should be. Romantic poets saw doomed love. Victorian moralists preached about duty neglected. A 2023 graphic novel even transplants the story to a cyberpunk dystopia, where the letter is a corrupted data file and Anselm a rogue AI. Through it all, one thread endures: the terror of being unheard. Whether painted on vellum or rendered in pixels, that fear transcends time. Perhaps the most poignant tribute hangs in a Brussels museum, a 21st century sculpture titled Delivery Failed. A bronze messenger kneels eternally, his outstretched hands empty, while holographic letters rain around him, dissolving before they touch the ground. Visitors often leave notes at its base, scribbling their own lost messages, apologies never sent, confessions too late. The artist nailed the paradox. We're haunted not by what was lost, but by the infinite possibilities that died with it. These cultural echoes prove the story's real power lies in its unfinished nature. Like a medieval game of telephone, each retelling distorts the facts but sharpens the emotional truth. The letter isn't just a plot device, it's a mirror, and the reflection changes every time we dare to look. Centuries after Alaric's doomed letter vanished into the fog, the core lesson still stings. Communication breakdowns don't just happen, they cascade. Modern diplomats might not rely on horse-bound couriers, but the pitfalls of miscommunication have simply evolved, not disappeared. Consider how a single mistranslated phrase in a 21st century trade agreement can trigger tariffs worth billions, or how an auto-corrected text between world leaders might escalate tensions overnight. The medium has changed, but the stakes feel eerily familiar. Today's leaders could take a page from Alaric's tragedy by recognizing that speed doesn't guarantee clarity. We've swapped parchment for emails and encrypted chats, yet ambiguity thrives in the gaps between words. A hastily drafted tweet can ignite protests. A poorly worded memo might tank alliances. The difference now: mistakes go viral before anyone can hit undo. Medieval kings faced agonizing delays. Today's problem is the opposite. decisions ricochet across the globe in seconds, leaving no time to reconsider. That's why the best negotiators now build redundancy into every critical message. Follow-up calls, written summaries, even old-fashioned hand-delivered letters when pixels feel too flimsy. But the parallels run deeper. Just as Henric's court might have intercepted Alaric's messenger, modern states exploit cyber attacks to disrupt digital dispatches. In 2017, hackers leaked emails between French presidential candidates, twisting public perception on the eve of an election. Unlike brother Anselm's fate, there was no mystery, just a deliberate sabotage of trust. And while medieval spies relied on bribes and daggers, their successors deploy malware and deepfakes, forging documents with a keystroke instead of a quill. The tools are slicker, but the game hasn't changed. Perhaps the sharpest lesson lies in what Alaric got right. His letter wasn't just a demand, it offered concessions, acknowledged Henric's grievances, and included a personal token to humanize the plea. Modern diplomacy often forgets this art of tangible goodwill. A well-timed state dinner or a symbolic gift, like Westmark's silver brooch, can still bridge divides that video calls can't. When tensions flared between two Asian nations in 2019, a shared fishing rights agreement was reached not over Zoom, but during a tea ceremony where leaders exchanged family recipes alongside treaties. Sometimes peace needs more than words, it needs something to hold onto. Yet for all our progress, one medieval weakness persists: assuming silence means consent. Alaric waited weeks for a reply that would never come, mistaking absence for rejection. Today, leaders stare at unanswered emails or read notifications, spinning narratives from voids. The cure isn't just better technology, it's humility. The wisest negotiators now send envoys in person when screens fail, or pick up the phone when texts go cold. Because history's clearest warning isn't about lost letters, it's about the arrogance of thinking your message was ever received as intended, the truth. Diplomacy has always been a high-wire act over a canyon of misunderstandings. Whether the wire is made of parchment fibers or fiber optic cables, the fall hurts just the same. Alaric's story endures because it's not really about the past, it's a mirror reflecting our own fragile attempts to be heard in a noisy world. And sometimes the loudest lesson is the one whispered by history. No matter the era, peace hangs by the thinnest of threads. The real question is whether we'll bother to double knot it this time. Archaeologists have scoured the Blackthorn Pass for generations, sifting through layers of history in search of even the tiniest fragment that might belong to brother Anselm or his lost dispatch. In 2018, a team from the University of Lyon made a tantalizing discovery: a scrap of vellum lodged between rocks near the riverbank, its edges frayed by centuries of moisture. Though most of the writing had dissolved, spectral imaging revealed traces of iron gall ink in the distinct angular script favored by Westmark's royal scribes. The fragment was too small to decipher any meaningful text, but its location matched medieval accounts of the courier's planned route, even more compelling. A glob of red sealing wax still clinging to one corner, its surface imprinted with what might have been the tip of a crown consistent with Alaric's royal seal. Then there's the matter of the brooch. In 2021, metal detectorists scanning a farmer's field near the old fords of Marrow unearthed a tarnished silver clasp depicting a rose wrapped in thorns, an exact match for Queen Isolde's personal emblem described in court records. The artifact lay just off the main pilgrim trail, its chain broken as if ripped away in haste. Was this the very token Alaric sent as proof of good faith, lost during some unseen struggle? Or did Anselm discard it deliberately, perhaps to lighten his load after an injury? Forensic soil analysis showed traces of human blood on the metal. though centuries of oxidation made DNA recovery impossible. The most haunting find emerged from an unlikely place, a monastery cellar in southern France. During renovations in 2019, workers uncovered a decayed saddlebag buried beneath flagstones, its leather embossed with Westmark's stag crest. Inside were moldering parchment scraps too fragile to unfold, along with a corroded dagger and a single weathered boot. The style matched footwear worn by lay brothers in Alaric's era, and the blade's unique serpentine crossguard corresponds to weapons issued to royal couriers for self-defense. But here's the twist: carbon dating placed these items decades after the lost letters timeline. Could this be evidence of a later cover-up, or did Anselm, or someone impersonating him, survive longer than history remembers? Recent advancements in technology offer new hope for solving the mystery. Hyperspectral imaging can now detect vanished ink on parchment fragments invisible to the naked eye, while isotope analysis of wax seals might trace their origins to specific mines or workshops. A 2023 study even attempted to reconstruct the letter's possible route using medieval weather records and horse gate simulations, pinpointing 3 high-probability locations where remnants might still lie buried. Some researchers have turned to unconventional methods, training dogs to sniff out centuries-old parchment proteins in cave systems near the pass. Yet for every promising lead, there are dead ends and red herrings. A 2012 claim of finding Anselm's skeleton in an alpine ice patch unraveled when radiocarbon dating revealed the bones belonged to a 16th-century goat herder. A much-publicized 2020 auction of a lost royal letter proved to be an elaborate forgery, its ink containing modern synthetic dyes. These false starts underscore the challenge of separating fact from folklore when dealing with artifacts that have passed through countless hands and imaginations over 6 centuries. The real breakthrough may come not from the earth but from the air. LiDAR scans of the Blackthorn region have revealed previously unknown footpaths and ruins that could rewrite our understanding of medieval travel routes. One such scan detected what appears to be a collapsed messenger relay station just 2 miles off Anselm's documented path, a place where he might have sought shelter or been ambushed. Excavations there are ongoing, but already teams have uncovered charred wood and what might be the remains of a signal fire. Was this station attacked to prevent messages from passing, or was it simply abandoned to time? Each shard of pottery, each nail pulled from the soil holds potential clues to the letter's final resting place. What makes these archaeological fragments so compelling isn't just their physicality, it's how they force us to confront the human scale of this tragedy. That scrap of vellum wasn't just paper, it was held by a real hand, folded by real fingers that never got to see its purpose fulfilled. The brooch didn't just symbolize peace, it warmed the skin of a queen who died believing her legacy might prevent bloodshed. These objects whisper across centuries, reminding us that history isn't made by abstract forces, but by fragile things, wax that cracks, ink that fades, and trust that unravels one missed connection at a time. Perhaps we'll never find the letter intact, perhaps it's better that way. Some mysteries resist solving because their power lies in the questions they force us to ask about how we communicate, how we trust, and how often we mistake silence for malice. The real artifact isn't parchment or silver, but the lesson etched into their absence, that every message we send carries the ghost of Alaric's plea, riding into the unknown with no guarantee it will ever be heard. The weight of undelivered words pressed hardest on King Alaric in those final days before the war. Imagine standing at a window watching storm clouds gather, knowing you'd sent your best hope into that darkness and heard nothing back. Court chronicles describe a ruler transformed, the man who once drafted letters with meticulous patience now snapping at scribes for smudged ink, pacing the halls like a caged bear. His advisors whispered of sleepless nights where he'd reopen old correspondence, tracing his own sentences as if they might reveal some fatal flaw, the cruelest cut. Not knowing whether his plea had been ignored, intercepted, or simply lost to chance, that uncertainty gnawed at him far worse than any outright refusal would have. A rejected offer could be countered. Silence was a void that bred paranoia. For Duke Henrik, the absence of Alaric's letter didn't just breed suspicion, it weaponized it. Medieval rulers lived by a brutal code. Silence was insult, delay was defiance. Each day without a reply hardened Henrik's belief that Westmark considered him unworthy of negotiation. His courtiers fed the fire, spinning theories of Alaric, mocking them over feasting tables or conspiring with neighboring lords. The irony, Henrik's own spies had likely intercepted other messengers before. He knew exactly how easily words could vanish, yet when it happened to him, he chose the interpretation that justified war. Power thrives on certainty, and the void where Alaric's letter should have been became a canvas for Henrik's worst assumptions. Then there's brother Anselm, the ghost at the heart of this tragedy. If he survived the journey, what tortures might he have endured? A devout man who'd taken vows of honesty, failure would have shattered his spirit long before any physical harm. Medieval couriers swore oaths on relics. To break one was to risk eternal damnation. Even if bandits stole the letter, Anselm would have faced an impossible choice: return empty-handed and be branded a traitor, or flee and live as an outlaw. The monastery's records note his cell remained untouched for years, his psalms still open on the desk. Some brothers claim to hear faint scratching at the gates during storms. Superstition, surely, but telling all the same. In a world where messengers were human telegrams, failure wasn't just professional, it was existential. The psychological ripple effects spread far beyond these three men. Alaric's courtiers, once confident in their king's diplomatic prowess, began second-guessing every decision. Chroniclers wrote of advisors hiding reports of border skirmishes, afraid to trigger another outburst. Meanwhile, Blackfurn's soldiers marched to war convinced Westmark had spat on their honor, their rage stoked by ballads about the silent slight. Both sides fought harder, not just for land, but to soothe the humiliation of being unheard. What makes this breakdown so haunting is how modern it feels. Strip away the parchment and horses, and you're left with the same raw nerves we grapple with today: the text that goes unanswered, the email lost to spam filters, the creeping dread that maybe, just maybe, the silence is personal. Alaric's frustration, Henrik's paranoia, Anselm's helplessness, their mirrors reflecting our own fears about connection and control. The medieval world lacked read receipts, but the emotional calculus was identical. Without proof, your words landed. Even the sturdiest relationships start to rot from the inside. Perhaps the deepest wound was the theft of closure. Wars end with treaties, betrayals with confessions, but a lost letter leaves every what if forever dangling. For Alaric, that meant dying in battle, never knowing if his plea had been enough. For Henrik, it meant ruling conquered lands while whispers of his hastiness followed him to the grave. And for Anselm, if his bones lie somewhere in the Blackthorn Pass, they carry the bleakest epitaph of all. A man who became collateral damage in a war of misunderstandings, his purpose reduced to an absence that others filled with their own narratives. History remembers the battles and the body counts, but it's these intimate fractures, the crumbling of trust between individuals, that truly shape destinies. The letter's physical loss was trivial compared to the psychological chasm it carved. Two men who might have been allies turned to enemies by the deafening sound of nothing at all. Medieval courts thrived on secrets, and the business of intercepting letters wasn't just opportunistic, it was an art form. spies didn't lurk in shadowy corners wearing cloaks and daggers. They blended in as scribes, servants, even trusted advisors. A groom brushing down a messenger's horse might slip a coin to peek inside his saddlebag. A scribe copying a lord's correspondence could sell drafts to rival courts before the ink dried. The real masters of espionage weren't the ones breaking seals. They were the ones ensuring those seals reached the wrong hands without leaving a trace. Take the case of the Venetian Black Chamber, a clandestine office where skilled forgers steamed open diplomatic letters, copied their contents, and resealed them with indistinguishable wax replicas. By the time the original missive reached its destination, Venice's Doge already knew its secrets. Similar operations existed in every major kingdom. Westmark's own archives hint at a keeper of whispers on Alaric's payroll, tasked with bribing border guards to delay rival couriers for inspection. But the most effective spies were often the least conspicuous. A Blackfen merchant's ledger from the war's early days lists payments to a woman identified only as the brewer's widow, who allegedly hosted messengers at her inn and served them ale laced with poppy extract, just enough to make them sleep through the night while their letters were copied. The stakes were staggeringly high. Intercepted intelligence could reveal troop movements, expose traitors, or in the case of Alaric's lost letter, derail peace before it gained momentum. Some intercepted dispatches were altered mid-journey, their terms twisted to provoke conflict. A surviving manual from a 15th century Burgundian spymaster details how to mimic handwriting. Take the quill at the same slant as your target and mind the spacing between words, for this betrays more than the letters themselves. Forgery wasn't just about replicating seals, it required understanding the psychology behind the words. A single phrase inserted into a truce offer, as you have so graciously requested, could imply subservience, sparking outrage in a proud recipient. Yet the greatest weapon in a spy's arsenal wasn't stealth, but patience. The best informants cultivated relationships over years, earning trust until their targets handed over secrets willingly. A Blackfen knight's diary recounts how his squire, a boy he'd trained for a decade, was revealed as a Westmark plant after singing like a choir bird under torture. The squire's real betrayal wasn't passing information. It was waiting until the eve of battle to cripple supply lines. This long-game deception mirrored the fate of Alaric's letter. If Henric's spymaster did intercept it, he wouldn't have just destroyed it. He'd have let the silence fester, allowing Alaric's own doubts to do the work of 1,000 swords. The chilling truth, most intercepted letters weren't stolen by enemy agents, but by those closest to the sender. A fragment from Westmark's treasury records mentions a clerk executed for overhearing what he ought not, suggesting even palace walls had ears. Perhaps the real reason Alaric's plea never reached Henrik wasn't bandits or blizzards, but a discreet knife slipped between the ribs of the wrong scribe. In a world where knowledge was power, the deadliest conflicts weren't fought on battlefields, they were waged in whispers, one vanished parchment at a time. The lost letter wasn't just parchment and wax, it became a mirror for every era's deepest anxieties about connection and control. To the medieval mind, its disappearance echoed biblical warnings. A single broken covenant could bring down kingdoms. Chroniclers of Alaric's time spun it as divine punishment, a test of faith failed by human frailty. But peel back the layers and you'll find the letter's true power lies in its duality. It's both a relic of what was and a specter of what might have been, a blank space that invites projection. For diplomats, it's the ultimate what if, proof that peace hangs by threads as thin as a courier's pulse. For historians, it's a case study in how narratives calcify, how the absence of evidence becomes evidence itself, twisting silence into whatever justification a society needs. Consider how differently the letter resonates across cultures. In Westmark's surviving folklore, it's a tragic love story. Alaric's words to Henrik compared to unrequited vows, the broken seal a stand-in for a shattered heart. Blackfan's ballads, though, recast it as arrogance made manifest, a king's words so hollow the wind stole them. These competing myths reveal less about the letter's contents than about the raw human need to assign blame. When truth vanishes, symbolism rushes in to fill the void. Even the physical object took on mystical qualities. Fragments of authentic wax seals circulated as pilgrim charms for centuries, despite radiocarbon dating proving most were medieval fakes. The idea of the letter became more potent than its reality. Modern thinkers dissect its symbolism through sharper lenses. Psychologists frame it as the ultimate communication breakdown, a medieval antecedent to left on read anxiety, where unanswered messages spiral into existential dread. Political scientists see a parable about verification. Without confirmation, even the best intentions curdle into suspicion. There's a reason the phrase, "the letter that never arrived," still surfaces in policy debates, shorthand for the dangers of acting without full context. The digital age has only amplified these parallels. Swap parchment for emails, and the core fear remains identical, that somewhere in the labyrinth of servers and firewalls, a critical message languishes unseen while consequences unfold unchecked. What makes the letter timeless isn't its historical weight, but its uncomfortable intimacy. Everyone knows the ache of words unspoken or unheard, the apology swallowed before delivery, the job application lost in a spam folder, the hospital call that never came through. Alaric's dispatch distills that universal dread into a single artifact. Its power doesn't come from royal seals or inked phrases, but from the silence it left behind. A silence two kingdoms mistook for malice. A silence that still echoes in every modern conflict born from crossed wires and missed signals. The real tragedy isn't that the letter vanished. It's that we keep repeating its story century after century, as if hoping this time the ending might change. Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist who understood war as deeply as words, once wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." His wisdom wasn't just about swords and shields, it was about the power of communication. A well-timed message could dismantle alliances or rally armies, while a misplaced word could ignite disaster. Centuries later, his words echo hauntingly in Alaric's tragedy. A war that might have been avoided had the right words reached the right ears. Machiavelli, no stranger to the murky dance of diplomacy, offered a darker perspective. Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. In his view, clarity wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon. A ruler's survival depended on controlling the narrative, whether through truth or cunning. One wonders how he'd judge Henrik's choice to interpret silence as insult. Was the Duke deceived by circumstance, or did he seize the ambiguity as an excuse for conquest? The line between victim and opportunist blurs when messages go astray. Queen Elizabeth I, a master of political theatre, famously declared, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." Her genius lay in crafting messages that resonated across divides, turning perceived weaknesses into strengths. Alaric's lost letter carried a similar vulnerability, an offer of compromise wrapped in humility. Had it been heard, would Henrik have seen honor in concession or only weakness to exploit? Elizabeth's reign proves that tone can shape destiny as much as the words themselves. Even further back, the Roman statesman Cicero warned, "Silence is one of the great arts of conversation," a reminder that what isn't said often speaks loudest. In Alaric's case, the absence of a reply screamed louder than any declaration of war. The medieval world, like our own, was fraught with the peril of unspoken assumptions. A king's silence could be read as contempt, a duke's pause mistaken for plotting. Cicero's insight cuts to the core of this story. Communication isn't just about transmission, it's about the space between sender and receiver, and how easily that space becomes a chasm. The Islamic scholar Al-Ghazali took a spiritual view. Knowledge without action is wastefulness, and action without knowledge is foolishness. His words resonate painfully here. Alaric's knowledge, his carefully drafted plea for peace, meant nothing without the action of delivery. Conversely, Henric's reckless march to war, devoid of the letter's context, was the epitome of foolishness. The medieval world was littered with such disconnects, where wisdom failed to bridge the gap between intention and outcome. These voices, spanning continents and eras, weave a common thread. Communication is the fragile scaffold holding human alliances together. When it crumbles, so does trust, and with it, peace. The tragedy of Alaric's lost letter isn't just its physical disappearance, it's how its absence became a canvas for every fear, ambition, and miscalculation simmering beneath the surface. The philosophers got it right. Words aren't just tools, they're the lifeblood of understanding. And when they vanish into the void, the silence left behind is anything but empty. Imagine a film director gripping the edges of their storyboard, tracing the path of Brother Anselm's doomed journey through the whispering forest. The camera lingers on the monk's trembling hands as he checks the royal seal one last time before nudging his horse into the mist. This is the kind of scene that sets Hollywood hearts racing, a historical thriller dripping with tension, where the fate of kingdoms hinges on a single parchment. Modern retellings of Alaric's lost letter don't just recount events, they amplify the human stakes, turning couriers into heroes and silence into a character all its own. Historical reenactors have staged the moment with visceral intensity at medieval fairs across Europe. In one notable performance, the audience plays the role of Blackfurn's court, forced to deliberate without the letter's context as actors in chainmail shout conflicting advice. The genius lies in the staging. Viewers don't just watch the drama, they feel the weight of missing information, the paranoia of decisions made in the dark. Some troops take it further, hiding a replica letter somewhere on the festival grounds and letting spectators intercept it, blurring the line between past and present. These aren't just pageants, they're empathy machines, making centuries-old frustrations pulse with immediacy. Novelists, meanwhile, feast on the gaps in the record. A best-selling alt history series reimagines Anselm as a woman disguised as a monk, her gender adding layers of danger to an already perilous mission. Another paints the letter's contents as a cipher, its true meaning decipherable only by a Jewish cartographer traveling with the courier, a nod to the multicultural networks that truly underpinned medieval Europe. The best of these stories don't rewrite history, they deepen it, using fiction to explore truths too messy for textbooks. How many real-life Anselms were women in disguise? How often did marginalized voices shape events they'd never get credit for? The lost letter becomes a keyhole, inviting us to peek at the vibrant, complicated world beyond the palace gates. Filmmakers face a unique challenge: how to dramatize an event defined by absence. A recent award-winning short film tackled it by never showing the letter at all. Instead, the camera follows its shadow the way soldiers tense when a rider approaches without it, how Alaric's quill hovers over blank parchment when he tries to rewrite what's vanished. The real star is the soundtrack, a nerve-wracking mix of creaking saddle, leather, and wind howling through the pass, punctuated by the occasional snap of a twig that never gets explained. It's a masterclass in suspense, proving that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we don't see. Even video games have seized on the premise. A popular strategy title includes a Messenger's Gambit mode where players must balance speed and secrecy, choosing between guarded roads or bandit-haunted shortcuts. One wrong turn and your carefully crafted piece offer rots in a ditch while armies clash. The brilliance is in the gameplay. It forces you to think like a medieval ruler, where information isn't instant and every decision is a gamble. You don't just learn about history, you live its frustrations. What unites these reimaginings isn't just creative license, it's the shared recognition that Alaric's tragedy isn't locked in the past. Every era reinvents the story to mirror its own anxieties about miscommunication. For reenactors, it's a cautionary tale about the fragility of truth in an age of misinformation. Novelists use it to explore voices erased from the record. Filmmakers frame it as a psychological thriller for our hyper-connected yet isolating world. The details shift, but the core remains, a reminder that peace isn't just about speaking, it's about being heard. Perhaps the most poignant reinterpretation comes from an unexpected source, a Berlin-based theater collective that staged the story entirely through dance. Anselm's journey becomes a series of frantic, repetitive motions clutching at the air, miming storms, collapsing as unseen hands pull him backward. The letter is represented by a single lit candle, carried gingerly across the stage until a sudden gust extinguishes it. No words, just movement and light. And yet, when the dancer playing Alaric sinks to his knees, reaching for a flame that's already gone, the audience understands something no history book could convey: how it feels to send your best hope into the darkness and never know if it reached the light. The war sparked by that missing letter didn't just redraw borders, it rewrote futures. Within 5 years of the first clash, Westmark's once fertile valleys lay scorched and fallow, their villages reduced to charred timbers and scattered bones. Blackfurn's victory came at a cost no one anticipated. The Duke's prized cavalry, decimated in a reckless charge, left his northern flank vulnerable to raids from opportunistic neighbors. What began as a localized squabble over trade routes metastasized into a regional free-for-all, with 6 lesser lords jumping into the fray, each carving off chunks of the weakened kingdoms. Maps from the era show a jagged patchwork of new territories, their boundaries etched in blood rather than diplomacy. The most haunting change, the Silverpine Forest, a neutral buffer zone where Alaric had proposed shared governance in his lost letter, became a wasteland of stumps and mass graves, its rivers clogged with the debris of siege engines. Dynasties toppled like dominoes. Alaric's line ended with his youngest son's capture at the Battle of Grey Mere, where the boy king was paraded in chains before being accidentally trampled during a prisoner transfer. Henric's triumph proved equally brittle. Without Westmark's grain shipments, Blackfurn's people starved through 3 brutal winters, and by the time the Duke died officially of fever, though court poets hinted at poison, his heirs inherited a realm buckling under debt and rebellion. The real winners emerged from the shadows, a mercenary captain who seized the port city of Varnhold and declared himself prince, and a crafty archbishop who brokered peace not with swords, but by buying up both kingdoms' debts and foreclosing on their crowns. Cultural scars ran deeper than political ones. The war birthed a generation of ballads painting Westmark as tragic martyrs and Blackfurn as honorless butchers, though the truth was messier. A traveling troupe's satirical puppet show mocking both kings became so popular that Henric's successors banned theater for decades, fearing its power to shape memory. Even language shifted. The word messenger gained a secondary meaning, a bearer of doom, in Westmark's dialect, while Blackfurn's legal codes began requiring all royal decrees to be delivered in triplicate, a bureaucratic scar from the war's central trauma. The most insidious legacy was the erosion of trust. Before the conflict, marriages between Westmark and Blackfen nobles had been common. Afterward, unions across the new borders were seen as treasonous. Trade routes that once carried wine and wool now moved weapons and salt for preserving corpses. A chronicler from the era wrote, "We no longer fear the stranger at our gates, we fear the friend who might have been one." This paranoia outlasted the combat by generations. When a later Westmark king proposed rebuilding the bridge at Grey Mere as a peace gesture, mobs tore it down before the mortar could dry, shouting about hidden daggers in the stones. Yet amid the rubble, glimmers of unintended consequences flickered. The war's chaos created vacuums that allowed marginalized groups to seize fleeting power. In the mountains, coal miners, once tied to feudal lords, formed the first documented labor guilds, bargaining collectively for wages. A convent of scribes near the ruined Silver Pine began preserving oral histories from refugees, creating an archive that would later prove invaluable to historians. Even military tactics evolved. The war's early reliance on heavy cavalry gave way to agile infantry units, foreshadowing the decline of knightly dominance. The cruelest irony, the very territories they fought over became worthless. Shifting trade routes bypassed the war-torn region entirely, leaving Blackfen's descendants ruling a backwater while new powers rose along coastal harbors. A merchant's ledger from 2 generations later lists Westmark's former capital as a market for turnips and old armor, no spices or silk to be had. The lost letters' proposed compromise shared access to the Blackthorn Pass would have kept both kingdoms vital. Instead, their stubbornness paved the way for their own irrelevance. Centuries later, archaeologists sifting through Grey Mere's ruins found a child's slate beneath the rubble, its surface scratched with a game of tic-tac-toe. That simple grid, frozen in time, captures the war's true legacy. 2 sides locked in futile conflict, their moves predictable, their endgame inevitable. The borders they bled over are gone, the dynasties they fought for forgotten. But the lesson lingers: how quickly ambition, fueled by silence, can burn everything to the ground, leaving only echoes of what might have been. The echoes of Alaric's lost letter reverberate through our hyper-connected world, where a single misdirected email or delayed notification can spark international incidents. Consider the 2010 Cablegate scandal when leaked U.S. diplomatic cables exposed private assessments of foreign leaders, raw, unvarnished words never meant for public consumption. Overnight, trust between allies frayed as politicians scrambled to explain blunt phrases like mercurial or thin-skinned. The fallout wasn't just embarrassment, it altered negotiations on nuclear disarmament and trade for years. Like the medieval scribes who carefully crafted royal correspondence only to see it intercepted, modern diplomats learned the hard way that digital messages have a way of escaping their intended audience. Social media has amplified these risks exponentially. In 2017, a mistranslated tweet from Qatar's state news agency falsely quoted their emir praising Iran, triggering an immediate blockade by neighboring Gulf states. By the time officials clarified the hack, Saudi Arabia and Egypt had already severed ties, a modern echo of Henrik's troops mobilizing before verifying Alaric's silence. The speed of digital communication means misunderstandings now escalate at the pace of a retweet, leaving no time for couriers to ride back with corrections. Even seemingly minor glitches can have outsized consequences. During the 2014 Ukraine crisis, a bug in Germany's foreign ministry email system delayed critical messages between Berlin and Moscow for 72 hours. By the time engineers restored connectivity, Russian troops had fortified positions in Crimea, and diplomatic solutions had narrowed to a sliver. It's a scenario Alaric would have recognized instantly. Technology fails, assumptions harden, and actions outpace intentions. The medieval world feared bandits on mountain passes. Today we dread server crashes and phishing scams that hijack sensitive communications. Corporate boardrooms aren't immune either. When a major tech firm's acquisition deal collapsed in 2019, investigators traced the breakdown to an executive Slack message: "They'll never accept this offer," accidentally sent to the wrong channel. The recipient company interpreted it as bad faith and walked away, sparking a billion-dollar lawsuit. Like the forged Florentine letter that escalated tensions in 1527, a single digital misfire derailed months of careful negotiation. Yet the most chilling parallel lies in how modern leaders, like their medieval counterparts, still weaponize ambiguity. When North Korea's state media mistakenly published then deleted a statement threatening nuclear war in 2018, analysts debated for days whether it was a technical glitch or psychological warfare, just as historians still argue whether Henrik truly never received Alaric's letter or simply chose to ignore it. In both eras, the absence of clarity becomes its own strategic tool, keeping adversaries off balance. The lesson isn't that technology has failed us, but that human nature remains stubbornly unchanged. We still overinterpret silences, still assume malice where incompetence suffices, still let pride override the basic courtesy of asking, "Did you get my message?" The parchment may have been replaced by pixels, but the peril of the unread dispatch endures a reminder that peace has always depended not just on sending words, but on ensuring they land. Put yourself in Alaric's boots for a moment, staring at a map as the first reports of Blackfurn's mobilization arrive, your stomach sinking with the awful realization that your plea for peace might be rotting in a ditch somewhere. Do you double down on diplomacy, risking precious time to send a second messenger who could also vanish? Or do you start calling banners, knowing every hour spent writing letters is an hour your enemies use to sharpen swords? There's no clean choice here. Wait too long and you're unprepared for war. Act too soon and you become the aggressor in the eyes of history. The agony of leadership isn't just making decisions, it's making them blindfolded with the weight of thousands of lives hanging on your hesitation. Now shift perspective. You're Duke Henrik, hearing whispers from the border but no formal reply from Westmark. Your scouts say Alaric's troops are massing, or are they just guarding harvests? Trust the silence and risk being mocked as weak, or strike first and risk being the villain. Medieval rulers didn't have the luxury of satellite imagery or secure hotlines. Every choice was a gamble where the stakes were measured in burned villages and orphaned children. Could you resist your war-hungry barons who stand to gain from plunder? Or would the pressure to prove your strength drown out the small voice whispering, "What if the letter never arrived?" And what of brother Anselm? If you were that lone figure urging a weary horse through bandit country, would you have taken safer roads and risked delays? Hidden the letter in your boot and burned the royal seal to avoid notice? Or would devotion to your oath keep you on the deadly path, even as shadows moved between the trees? The scariest part isn't the physical danger. It's the knowledge that one misstep could unravel everything. Modern jobs rarely carry such consequences, but we've all had moments where a missed email or overlooked detail spiraled into disaster. The medieval world just had fewer safety nets. Here's the cruelest twist: hindsight makes fools of us all. From our screens, it's easy to scoff at Alaric for not sending multiple couriers or Henrik for not verifying the silence. But imagine your Wi-Fi cutting out during a critical negotiation, or a colleague forgetting to forward an email that costs your company a client. The tools have changed, the human flaws haven't. We're all just one miscommunication away from our own version of that lost letter, whether it's a botched contract, a family rift, or a friendship crumbling over unanswered texts. So here's the challenge. Next time you're tempted to assume malice when someone doesn't reply, pause. Could their message be lost in transit, literal or digital? Before you escalate a conflict, ask, have you truly been ignored, or is there a blank space where understanding should be? History's greatest tragedies often hinge not on evil intentions, but on the void between what was said and what was heard. The real test isn't whether we'd have acted differently than Alaric or Henrik. It's whether we can learn from their silence before it becomes our own. Even after centuries of scrutiny, the fate of Alaric's lost letter remains shrouded in tantalizing gaps, each unanswered question a thread pulling us deeper into the labyrinth of history. Take the mystery of the wax seal. Forensic analysis of surviving Westmark documents suggests the king's seal bore a unique flaw, a tiny crack near the stag's antler, visible only under magnification. If true, any fragment of wax discovered in the Blackthorn Pass could be definitively linked to the missing dispatch. Yet no such fragment has ever been conclusively identified, leaving archaeologists to wonder, was the seal deliberately destroyed to erase evidence, or does it still lie buried beneath layers of sediment, waiting for a keen-eyed explorer to brush away the dirt? Then there's the enigma of the brooch. Queen Isolde's silver rose wasn't just jewelry, it doubled as a key to Westmark's cipher system, its intricate petals aligning with letter wheels to decode sensitive messages. If Henrik's spies had intercepted the letter and recognized the brooch's significance, they might have gained access to Alaric's entire network of correspondence. This raises a chilling possibility. Perhaps the letter was delivered, but its contents were exploited before being erased from the record. A fragmentary Blackfen inventory from the war's aftermath lists one rose-clasped coffer among seized items, but the contents are ominously labeled rendered void. The greatest unresolved question lingers over Brother Anselm's final moments. Medieval monastic records note that messengers undertaking perilous journeys often carried soul tokens, small personal items tucked into their garments to identify their bodies if found. Anselm's cell was reportedly missing two things after his disappearance: a wooden cross carved by his father and a psalter with his name inked on the flyleaf. Could these artifacts still surface in some forgotten reliquary or antiquarian's collection? In 2014, a collector in Marseille claimed to possess a blood-stained psalter matching this description, but the book vanished before scholars could authenticate it, leaving only a blurry photograph as proof. Historians also grapple with the letter's potential ripple effects. If the plea for peace had reached Henrik, would it have altered his strategy, or was war inevitable? A marginal note in a Blackfen commander's diary, discovered in a Lithuanian archive in 2020, hints at dissent within Henrik's ranks. One entry describes a faction of nobles urging restraint, citing words from the West we were not meant to see. Was this a reference to Alaric's lost letter or another communication entirely? The page ends mid-sentence as if the writer was interrupted or censored. Technology may yet pry open these sealed vaults of history. Recent advances in multispectral imaging allow researchers to read the ghosts of ink on parchment too damaged for the naked eye, while AI-driven linguistic analysis can reconstruct probable wording from surviving fragments. One team is even training algorithms to simulate medieval scribble hands, hoping to identify forgeries or spot patterns in scattered documents. But for all our tools, some truths may stay buried, not from lack of evidence, but because the past guards its secrets with the same ferocity as any king guarding his throne. What makes these gaps so compelling isn't just the missing facts, it's how they mirror our own lives. We've all sent messages that vanished into the void, faced silences we strained to interpret, or wondered how different things might be if one conversation had gone differently. Alaric's lost letter isn't just a historical puzzle. It's a metaphor for the fragility of human connection, a reminder that every word we send carries the weight of what might have been. And perhaps that's why we keep searching, not just for answers, but for the solace of knowing we're not the first to wrestle with the unbearable lightness of the unsaid. We cling to historical what-ifs like loose threads on a tapestry, tugging gently to see how much might unravel or what hidden patterns could emerge. There's something irresistible about imagining how one tiny change, a letter delivered, a storm avoided, a single life spared, might have rewritten everything. But this obsession isn't just idle daydreaming. It's a way of honoring how fragile history truly is. Every major event we take for granted, the rise of empires, the end of wars, the birth of ideas, hangs by a spider's thread of chance. Alternate histories don't just entertain us, they humble us. They force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the world we know wasn't inevitable. It was built on 1,000 near misses and split-second decisions, any of which could have sent civilization careening down a different path. Consider how differently we'd remember Alaric's story if that letter had reached Henrik. Would textbooks now describe a golden age of Westmark Blackfen trade alliances? Would the silverpine forest still stand, its trees older than the concept of national borders? These counterfactuals aren't just imaginative exercises, they're tools for understanding how history actually works. By playing out scenarios where small variables shift, we start to see the hidden scaffolding beneath so-called inevitable events. Wars weren't just caused by deep-seated hatreds. Sometimes they sprang from something as trivial as a horse losing its shoe. This fascination also reveals a deeper psychological need, the desire to believe our choices matter. If history can pivot on something as slight as a misplaced letter, then today's small actions might carry similar weight. That's why alternate histories resonate across cultures, from Japanese isekai tales to Western steampunk, each one whispering the same reassurance: nothing is set in stone. The medieval peasant who imagined their lord making a kinder decision, the modern student speculating about averted wars, they're all engaging in the same act of resistance against fatalism. Yet there's danger in overindulging these fantasies. Spend too long dwelling on how things might have been, and you risk undervaluing how things are. The real power of historical what-ifs lies in their ability to sharpen our appreciation for the present. When we envision a world where Alaric's plea failed even after delivery, or where Henrik's scouts intercepted the letter but chose peace anyway, we're not just escaping reality, we're rehearsing for future moments of crisis. These mental simulations train us to spot forks in the road before they're obscured by hindsight's fog. Perhaps that's why this lost letter haunts us so persistently. It's not just a medieval mystery, it's a metaphor for every missed connection, every unheard plea, every time humanity's better angels were drowned out by the clatter of bad timing. The roads not taken aren't just footnotes, they're mirrors reflecting the delicate interplay of intention and accident that defines our collective story. And in studying them, we don't just learn about history, we learn how to shape it. The story of the letter that never arrived lingers like a whisper in the corridors of history, a testament to how easily the course of events can pivot on something as fragile as a single piece of parchment. It's not just a medieval curiosity, it's a mirror reflecting our own world, where miscommunication and missed connections still shape destinies. Think about the modern equivalents: the email lost in a spam folder that costs a business deal, the text message that never delivers before a relationship fractures, or the diplomatic cable that arrives too late to prevent a crisis. The tools have changed, but the human stakes remain achingly familiar. What makes this tale so enduring isn't just the tragedy of the lost letter itself, but the chain reaction it set off, a cascade of assumptions, pride, and missed opportunities. Alaric and Henrik weren't just victims of bad luck, they were prisoners of their own expectations. Silence in their world was never neutral. It was a void filled with fear, ego, and worst-case scenarios. And isn't that still true today? How often do we misinterpret someone's delayed reply as indifference, or assume the worst when a message goes unanswered? The medieval world lacked read receipts, but the emotional calculus was identical. The deeper lesson here is about the weight of the unsaid. Wars aren't just fought on battlefields, they're born in the gaps between intentions and perceptions. Alaric's letter wasn't just a plea for peace, it was a lifeline tossed into the dark, severed before it could be grasped. Its absence became a weapon, wielded by those who profited from conflict. Today, we might not send messengers through bandit country, but we navigate our own labyrinths of misinformation and algorithmic noise, where the truth can be just as elusive. The question isn't whether history repeats itself, but whether we'll recognize the patterns before it's too late. So let's not romanticize this story as a relic of a bygone era. Its urgency pulses through every modern headline, every diplomatic stalemate, every personal misunderstanding that spirals out of control. The next time you hit send on a crucial message, or find yourself stewing over a silence you can't decipher, remember Alaric's quill scratching against parchment, Henrik's scouts straining their eyes for a rider who never came, and Brother Anselm's footsteps fading into the fog. The past isn't just a series of events, it's a warning, an invitation to do better. If this journey through the echoes of history resonated with you, consider this your call to action. Share your thoughts in the comments. What modern lost letters keep you up at night? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Until next time, keep listening for the whispers of the past. They have more to say than you might think.